In a family living near the Spring Mansion in Rothenberg, Germany, Armin Meiwes seemed like the perfect neighbor. He would mow their lawns and assist with fixing their vehicles. He was consistently courteous and amicable. This is exactly how his neighbors and anyone who interacted with him perceived him, as a wonderful person. Even his victim, considering their consent, was likely captivated by this man's politeness and kindness. Those who knew Armin personally would never have believed that this responsive, charming individual was actually a horrifying monster. Armin's crime was so terrible and incomprehensible that there were no laws that could clearly address this situation. Today's story will discuss the case of Armin Meiwes, known as the Cannibal of Rothenberg, or the Master Butcher. This person had previously posted an advertisement about the planned crime on an internet forum, and a candidate was found who voluntarily agreed to become Armin's victim. This case raised many questions, but the main one for many was why someone responded to the advertisement and willingly accepted the perpetrator's offer. Rothenberg on the Fulda, or simply Rothenberg, a small, enchanting town in Germany, renowned for its historic architecture. It is situated on the Fulda River, offering splendid views for walks and boating. Picturesque, timber-framed houses stand along the narrow streets of the historic town center, lending it a medieval charm. Rothenberg even has its own castle, which makes the town appear even more fairy tale-like. The authors of the famous Brothers Grimm tales spent some time in Rothenberg on the Fulda while traveling through Germany. It is believed that this location inspired the German writers with its mysterious beauty to create some of their stories. Today's story cannot be called a fairy tale. Rather, it belongs in horror films. Nevertheless, it occurred in this cozy little town, where only 13,500 people resided. The scenic surroundings of Rothenberg are probably the last thing that comes to mind when thinking about real criminal cases. However, even in such towns that seem to have stepped out of the pages of fairy tales, horrific crimes can occur. Armin Meiwes was born December 1, 1961, in Essen, Western Germany. He was the third son of Waltraud Meiwes, a woman who had left 3 husbands by the age of 45. Armin had 2 older stepbrothers. The boy's father was a police officer. He married Waltraud when he was 40 years old. Somehow, Armin's father had accumulated enough money and acquired an enormous mansion in Rothenberg, which had far more space than needed for a family of 5. And the number of empty rooms increased when Armin's 2 older brothers moved out. The boy remained living with his parents in the vast estate. At that time, he was 5 to 6 years old. Although Armin was still just a child, his father and mother paid him no attention. Waltraud showed no affection or love toward her son. She constantly scolded and criticized the boy. She was more interested in her spouse, whom she suspected of all deadly sins. She was a domineering, jealous woman who continuously accused her husband of devious affairs. If he was delayed at work for just a few minutes, Waltraud would begin to lose her mind. The boy regularly witnessed quarrels and conflicts between his parents. The mother repeatedly threatened the father that she would take his life if he ever abandoned her. And one day it happened. The man, exhausted from daily reproaches and scandals, simply got up and left one day, leaving Armin with his mother in the huge house. He made no warnings, gave no explanations. He rose and left the house, and they never saw him again. The fate of his son apparently didn't interest him either. In all the years that followed, the man never even attempted to meet with his child or learn how he was living. All manifestations of Waltraud's quarrelsome nature came crashing down on her youngest son. Armin felt no closeness with his mother. All she ever did was yell at and humiliate him. The boy was more of a servant in the house than a beloved child. Just as the woman controlled and tried to manage her husband's life, after his departure, she began to control her son. The mother accompanied the young man everywhere he went, not only in childhood, but also in adolescence. She even attempted to go with Armin on dates. Naturally, no one wanted to meet with a young man in the company of his mother. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. His father left the family when Armin was 7 years old. The boy remained living with his tyrannical mother. To somehow cope with the loss of his father and childhood traumas, Armin immersed himself in a fantasy world. He invented imaginary friends and brothers to have someone to talk to. One of these fictional characters was his brother Frankie. Incidentally, he later adopted this pseudonym for his internet communications. Generally, it's characteristic for many young children to fantasize about non-existent characters, especially when they have no peers around them in reality. But Armin's fascination took on a much more sinister nature. Absorbed in the fantasy world, the child became engrossed in reading a book his mother had read to him in childhood. It was the brothers' Grimm fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel. In the book's plot, a witch lured two children, a boy named Hansel and his sister Gretel, into a trap and tried to eat them. This story intrigued Armin so much that all his thoughts were consumed by contemplation. What would it be like to eat a living person? Armin dreamed that his friends would never leave him. He strongly felt that to be connected with his imaginary companions, they needed to become part of him. And for this to happen, they needed to be eaten. This was how the child reasoned, but his fantasies only intensified with each passing year. The unbearable desire to taste human flesh became increasingly acute. In childhood, Armin prepared dolls for barbecue and molded human limbs from marzipan. He would then place them in buns and eat them. The boy's childhood unfolded in such a bizarre atmosphere. In his teenage years, the imaginary brothers became objects of his intimate attraction. His desire to be one with them overshadowed all other fantasies. Moreover, it wasn't about the opposite sex, but specifically about young men and males. During this time, the young man realized his orientation differed from traditional. When Armin turned 19, he joined the West German Army and served in the armed forces for 12 years. But since the military unit was located near home, the young man effectively continued living with his mother, who still persisted in interfering with and controlling his life. Initially, the woman even accompanied her son to his army assignments. During this period, Armin occasionally formed friendships with women, but none of his acquaintances with the opposite sex developed into anything serious. His friends and fellow servicemen had long suspected that Armin had a non-traditional orientation. Therefore, the young man had to fabricate a story about a fiancée from another city. He told this to his friends, wanting to appear like everyone else. His military career faltered, and the constant oppressive lies led Meiwes to start drowning his problems in alcohol. Due to continuous drinking, Armin got into 2 accidents with service vehicles, as he often drove while intoxicated, and ultimately, he was discharged from the army. At 32, essentially jobless and caring for his sick mother, Meiwes decided to change careers. He trained as a computer repair specialist and secured a position at a bank. At that time, computers were beginning to appear in almost every home. Neighbors and friends frequently sought his assistance, so Armin was never without work and earned quite well. He spent all his remaining time exploring the online space. In the 1990s, when the Internet, or World Wide Web as it was also called, began to spread, users gained access to forums and chat platforms where like-minded individuals could communicate and discuss their interests with similar people. Online, one could find a forum for any topic that interested them, including, evidently, the consumption of human flesh. There were several chats dedicated to this subject, including one called the Cannibal's Cafe. And since the internet was still in its infancy, Few people thought about supervision or maintaining order on forums or in any other online activity. So people interested in this matter freely visited such platforms to share their thoughts, ideas, and fantasies with other users. Sites devoted to extreme fetishes appeared in great numbers, as many people, hiding behind computer monitors for the first time, could openly discuss their perverted whims. Armin was thrilled when he found people similar to himself. New online friends confirmed that his feelings weren't limited to just himself. The world was full of people dreaming of feasting on their own kind. Suddenly, what had been the man's personal fantasies started to look like something real. In 1999, after a prolonged illness, Armin's mother passed away. He was genuinely saddened by her departure and even transformed one of the rooms in the mansion into a shrine, intended to honor the memory of his closest person. After his mother's death, Armin lived in seclusion in the 30-room estate. Only after some time did he feel that he was free. His newfound freedom manifested in the man beginning to visit a brothel called Blue Lagoon. Then he immersed himself even more in the World Wide Web, spending most of his time on forums where the consumption of human flesh was discussed. Armin was an active visitor to these communities. He frequently discussed various meat preparation recipes with other users. Sometimes Armin would post photographs. But since he had no real experience in this matter, he photographed animal meat, shaping it to resemble parts of the human body, and told everyone that he periodically consumed human flesh. Incidentally, Armin inspired admiration on the forum and was one of the few people who claimed they actually acted on their secret fantasies, while others merely shared their own desires, not even believing they could one day be realized. And although at that time Armin was misleading everyone, taking advantage of internet anonymity, in reality, he was planning to turn this into truth. In a windowless room of the mansion, now free from his mother's watchful eye, the man created a butchering chamber. He specifically chose a room without windows, made it soundproof, and installed special meat hooks from the ceiling. Now all that remained was to find a person whom Armin wanted to prepare for dinner. Using the name of his imaginary brother Frankie, as Armin called himself on forums, he posted an advertisement with an unusual request, looking for a volunteer willing to be eaten. Such advertisements were actually not uncommon on sites for enthusiasts of human flesh. There is a term, vorophilia, a type of fetishism where a person derives pleasure from fantasizing about being eaten or eating another person, usually whole. It is often practiced online in role-playing games. Usually, vorophilia is not cannibalism, as it doesn't extend beyond fantasies or isn't actually directed at the death of the victim. Armin was looking for a well-built young man between 18 and 25 years old, whom he would divide into parts and then eat. The man's main goal wasn't just to find a victim. He needed an attractive young person who would both appeal to him and consent to being eaten. Surprisingly, Armin received dozens of responses to his advertisements, however. Ultimately, all respondents fell away on their own. The fact was that most people on such forums were simply looking for partners for role-playing games to fulfill their hidden fantasies, but they had no intention of actually implementing any of them. Then Armin began meeting men from dating sites in hotel rooms where everything again came down to role-playing. For example, one of them asked Armin to write the names of meat cuts on labels and then pin them to his body with needles. Once, Armin's disturbed fantasies almost became reality. One of the men responded to the advertisement saying he dreamed of being eaten. They arranged to meet at Armin's mansion. During the date, the homeowner explained in detail to the future voluntary victim what he intended to do with him. Fortunately, the guest couldn't go through with it. Apparently, it didn't immediately occur to him that one couldn't simultaneously be eaten and remain alive. He told Armin that he wasn't feeling well, so he changed his mind about becoming his dinner. Armen respected his partner's decision. Since the man was no longer a willing participant and couldn't fulfill his fantasy, he allowed him to peacefully leave the house. Then there were meetings with 3 other young men, each of whom, to Armen's disappointment, also backed out at some point. Armen decided he would never get lucky until the final candidate appeared on the horizon. This person was named Bernd Jürgen Armando Brandes. He was a 43-year-old software engineer from Berlin, working at Siemens AG in a management position. Brandes, like Armin, grew up in a single-parent family, except that the boy was raised by his father. He also had a non-traditional orientation. Additionally, the man dreamed of being hurt. This aroused him. As it turned out, Brandes had also posted similar advertisements, offering himself to be eaten by those willing. Moreover, he himself wished to dine on parts of his own body. Brandes suffered from depression and decided he was perfectly suited for Armen's carnivorous fantasy. The man described his height, 1 meter 75 centimeters, and weight, 72 kilograms. In their correspondence, he also expressed hope that Armen was truly serious about what he had written in the advertisement. Eventually, this man became the embodiment of the dream that Armen had since childhood, when he was abandoned by almost everyone in his life. In response to his controlling mother's domineering behavior, who in reality cared nothing for her son's inner turmoil, Armen had created this obsession and now stood at the threshold of his imagined dream. In February 2001, despite being in a relationship with another man, Brandes responded to Armen's advertisement. They corresponded for about a month, discussing cooking methods. Armen confessed this would be his first time. Brandes expressed his preferences regarding body parts. Some pieces he wanted to split and share with his partner. He suggested making an ashtray from his skull or using it as room decor. The men also discussed how to dispose of the remains. They decided to burn and bury them, so no one would ever discover what happened to Brandes. The pair arranged to meet on March 9, 2001. The day before, they exchanged playful messages. One wrote that he would bring himself for dinner. The other replied that he would try to work up an appetite by then. So, on March 9th, Brandes went to visit Armen. The men proceeded directly to the living room, where Armen could fully admire his dinner. They socialized, smoked, and drank coffee while discussing the upcoming feast. Then they secluded themselves in the bedroom to become closer to each other. Everything seemed to be going well, but at some point, Brandes decided he couldn't go through with what was planned and asked to be taken back to the train station. Armen was used to all those wanting to be eaten changing their minds at the last moment, so he politely agreed and drove his guest to the train. The evening promised to end in familiar solitude. But unexpectedly for Armen, just a couple of minutes before the train's departure, Brandes suggested trying again. He said that if he took a large dose of sleeping pills, some alcohol, and cold medicine, perhaps such a combination would dull the pain and he would be able to go through with it. That's what they decided. When the men returned to the mansion, they recorded a video in which Brandes gave his consent to the subsequent actions, including his own death at Meiwes' hands. After preparations and making love, Armen led his guest to his soundproof room. Their plan was put into action and recorded on video camera. In the windowless room, Brandes asked Armen to bite off his sexual organ, but this proved easier said than done. After several unsuccessful attempts, the mansion's owner had to resort to using a kitchen knife. Armed with a vice, Armen began to act. Brandes screamed from unbearable pain. Red liquid from the open wound gushed like a fountain, but after a minute the man fell silent. Brandes stated that he was no longer in pain. Eugene remained only conscious, and now he yearned to taste his own flesh. The men tried to eat the organ raw, but it was tough to chew, so Armen attempted to cook it, frying it in a pan with salt, pepper, garlic, and wine. But since he was simultaneously cooking and running to check on his partner, the exotic dish burned, turning into a hard lump. The disappointed mansion owner cut what remained of it into pieces and fed it to the dog. Bleeding heavily, Brandes asked Armen to draw a bath so he could relax and pass away peacefully. Meiwes fulfilled his guest's final wish and retreated to his room to read a book for a while, but the reading didn't go well. At first, every 15 minutes, the mansion owner ran to check on Brandes's consciousness. Then, instead of reading, he became immersed in dreams about the upcoming dinner. After about 3 hours, Armen went to check on Brandes again and discovered he was still alive, though unconscious. Armen prayed, kissed his victim on the forehead, and in an attempt to end his suffering, cut his partner's throat. After that, he hung him on hooks and began separating the meat as he had learned online. He even tried to grind the bones to use them as flour. Throughout this time, the video camera continued recording the gruesome act. This entire horrible series of events was captured on a 4-hour videotape. Armen buried the internal organs, skin, and head in his garden while he packaged the steaks from the body, labeled them, and stored them in a secret compartment hidden at the bottom of the freezer, covering them with other foods. The first meal became the embodiment of his 30-year dream. Therefore, Armen wanted to make this event special. He took out his mother's finest tableware, lit candles, and complimented the meal with exquisite red wine. The man sat in his luxurious dining room and enjoyed dinner prepared from his recent companion. He ate a steak taken from the back. The first bite evoked mixed sensations. The meat tasted similar to pork, but was more filling. According to Armen, other people would hardly notice the difference if they ate it. Over the next 10 months, Armen cooked and ate parts of Brandes, ultimately consuming 20 kilograms of flesh. Armen developed a taste for it and wanted more. He claimed that beyond the gustatory aspect, it brought satisfaction in ways he couldn't achieve before, but now the man wanted more. Armen returned to the forums in search of other interested individuals. He proudly boasted on the Flesh Enthusiast's website about how he had achieved his goal and hoped to soon find another victim. He wasn't shy about posting graphic images from that terrible day to brag and prove to everyone that he was now telling the truth. The hunt for fresh delicacies resulted in Armen's fall into an abyss. In July 2001, an Australian college student, after reading Armen's personal online correspondence and seeing the graphic images, became very concerned and contacted the police. The young man told investigators everything he knew about this person. Detectives tracked Armen's internet activity for 17 months before finally apprehending him. In December 2002, a search warrant was issued for the house, and police arrived at the mansion, hoping to find physical evidence. Armen didn't deny anything and immediately confessed to everything, handing over the tape recording to the officer. At first, he denied that the meat in his freezer was human, but under pressure he told the truth. These were the uneaten remains of Bernard Brandes. All else that remained of the 43-year-old engineer was found in the garden with the help of tracking dogs. The police were shocked by this case, but they were even more astonished when they played the videotape from the scene. The trial of Armen began a year later, in December 2003, and entered German jurisprudence history as one of the most unusual proceedings. Many people gathered to see a real cannibal. The courtroom was full. The video recorded by Armen and Brandes on that fateful day unexpectedly became a stumbling block for both sides. The defense team knew that due to the video evidence, their client couldn't escape punishment, so they tried to reduce the charge to killing by request and illegal form of euthanasia, since at that time, Germany had no law against cannibalism. Ironically, because of that same video recording, the prosecution decided they couldn't secure a first-degree murder conviction, since Brandes voluntarily agreed to die at Armen's hands. Due to the lack of legislative framework for this crime, the prosecutor had to consider alternative charges. A charge of taking life for intimate gratification was brought forward, which guaranteed 15 years imprisonment, and manslaughter, which carried 8.5 years in prison. For good measure, Armen was also charged with disturbing the peace of the dead. The case sparked public debate about whether Armen should be held accountable at all. Considering that Brandes was a willing participant in the crime against himself, while at the same time Armen took another's life, which was itself a crime punishable by law. The defendant was sent for psychiatric evaluation. The doctor determined that Armen had a fetishistic obsession with male flesh and an absolutely unusual, extremely pathological form of attachment. The man could only feel maximum connection with another person by consuming their body. The judge ruled that despite Armen's severe personality disorder, he bore full responsibility for the crime and was fit to stand trial to answer for his unlawful actions against Bernd Brandes. Although Germany is known for its tradition of open court proceedings, the public and press were asked to leave the courtroom before the jury viewed the crime footage. Due to how horrific the process recorded by Armen was, the grand jury was shown only 19 minutes of the 4-hour video. But even this proved too much for some. Nearly all the footage was so traumatizing that some involuntary viewers had to seek psychological help after the trial concluded. The prosecution team pointed to the defendant's organized, planned, and deliberate behavior both before and after the crime. At the time, Armen was in a sound state of mind, hadn't taken any substances beforehand, so he surely understood the unlawfulness of his own misconduct. Brandes's boyfriend testified at the trial, saying that Bernd had never before entertained such monstrous thoughts, that they were happy and planning a vacation together. He was very surprised when his partner disappeared without a trace, and then came a letter from Armen apologizing for eating his boyfriend. However, another former lover of Brandes reported that once the man had offered him 2,000 euros to bite off his sexual organ. Regardless of what mental state Brandes was in before this, on that fateful day, he was a willing participant in his own demise. This became clear from the video recording. The defense insisted that their client posed no danger to society as the victim had given consent to euthanasia. Armen himself maintained that he didn't want to take Brandes's life. He just wanted to eat him to become one. It was a childhood dream. On January 30th, 2004, the court concluded that Armen had no base motives for Brandes's death, though he undoubtedly bore responsibility for his demise. Armen was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 8.5 years imprisonment. The defendants and defense team disagreed with such a verdict. This led to a retrial. It focused on the fact that Brandes had some mental health issues and had taken a large dose of sleeping pills, alcohol, and an entire bottle of cold medicine. Armen took advantage of his condition for his own gratification. In May 2006, Armen was convicted again, this time for taking life and disturbing the peace of the dead. And in 2008, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. While serving his sentence, the man worked in the prison library and laundry, attending church. They say Armen became a vegetarian and headed the local chapter of the Green Party. In May 2020, Armen received permission for brief, supervised walks around the city. He was given sunglasses and a hat to conceal his identity. This case shocked the world, raising important questions about personal freedom. Armin Meiwes' story received wide publicity and inspired the creation of several songs and films. For example, the song Mein Teil by the German band Rammstein was written under the impression of this case. Rock musician Marilyn Manson named his album Eat Me, Drink Me in honor of Armen. Manson explained in an article that he couldn't understand the relationship between these two, but found the story itself very appealing in a romantic sense. Among the films based on Armen's case, notable ones include Your Heart in My Brain, Cannibal of Rothenberg, and the series The IT Crowd. Armin Meiwes expressed regret about his actions. He added that he wanted to write a book about his life to deter those who might want to follow in his footsteps. The man was certain that if such perverted fantasies weren't treated, they would eventually intensify and lead to a tragic end, as happened with him. The mansion where Armen lived burned down in a fire in April 2023, presumably caused by arson. The online cannibal community still exists on other platforms. Now Armen is 63 years old and is a model prisoner. Thank you for watching. Support our new channel by watching the new video, or stick around and watch our past videos. See you soon.